Yesterday, you may recall, we began discussing the significance, the critical nature of Seder, of bringing the Avod and the Karbanos in sequence. And if he brought that which should come later first, that's Likuva, that's going to undermine, and that's Chuka, the Avodas HaKarbanos. Now we have here a Machlokas Rishonim, and it's brought down here in this introduction, and I've tried to understand what he has in mind. So let me try to do it once more together with you. Nechleku Rishonim. This is on the top of page Dalet. Begeder ikuv haseder. What is the implication and the ramification of seder as a critical element in the avodas hakarbanos? Yesh sovrim, according to one school of thought, seder ha'omor hainu shekol avoda haklula b'seder zeh. Right, we have a certain seder. Avoda A, Avoda B, Avoda C. Any avoda included in that seder as a unit, haresh avodos hakodmos lo ma'akfos oso milaratzos. If I need A before B, B could not be maratza without A. Elo im teosa bismano li achar avodos hakodmos lo. B can only be functional, be meaningful and valid if it comes after A. C can only be valid if it comes after B. That I understand. The Yesh Sovrim, there's another dissenting school of thought. Sha'ikov HaSeder hu shekol avoda haklula b'seder zeh harei hi ma'keves es havodos habos achrei milaratzos elim ye'asu bizmanom liachar shenasta avodazu. Now, I'm going to just take a shot at it. I think there's a certain ambiguity in the pedagogy here, but I think what he means is that the second shita is so machmir that the seder is not just that A is required for B, B for C, but that A is required for C as well. And the entire sequence, like dominoes, is dependent one on the next. So if you have, in order to get to Z, you have to get to from A all the way to Y, if you follow what I mean, according to the second approach. The first approach says that Seder means that A has to become before B, and B alone without A is invalid. But it doesn't mean that if you had B without A, you can't bring C. So it means A is ma'akev for B, B is ma'akev for C, but A is not ma'akev for C. So he can bring B, C, etc., and he has a Seder. He's, according to the first approach, Lakula, all you need is to say that you have a kiyum, you fulfilled the Seder. And within each unit, you have a Seder. You have B coming before C. The second approach, L'chumra, says, no, I need the Seder as is. Each avoda has to come after the avoda that started this whole Seder. And if you're missing A, that's it, my friend. You cannot bring B, C, or D. That's the way I understood it. In the footnote, he writes the following, that Shitas Rashi, she'avodos shebifnim ma'akvos es habol bos lachreim, afim heim me'avodas chutz. Rashi says that you need the avodas pnim, the avodos that have to be done inside, which means, again, we had a machlokas yesterday whether it means inside the Kosh Kodshim or inside the Heichal. Those avodos are necessary for what comes afterwards, even though what comes afterwards is avodas chutz. And you would think that avodas chutz sets up its own sequence. No, avodas chutz is dependent upon what has to come before it, in this case, avodas pnim. Be'ilu avodos shebachutz, Einon ma'akvos es haboim lachrein. Fascinating, no? He's saying that avodas pnim must come critically. It's absolutely necessary before the avodas chutz. But once we have the avodas chutz and we've started that process of fulfilling the avodas chutz, there's no critical sequence within the only critical sequence applies to avodas pnim. Although again, the avodas chutz will depend upon the avodas pnim, but within the avodas chutz there is no seder, or I shouldn't say there is no seder, but at least it's not li kuva. That seems to be Rashi's shita as far as seder is concerned. But the Rambam, the way he's interpreted by Reb Chaim Halevi, is ein avodos shebifnim akvos avodas chutz. Avodas pnim and avodas chutz are two separate systems, if you will, marachot, and they have no overlap. There's no relationship between avodas pnim and avodas chutz, meaning avodas chutz does not depend upon avodas pnim, according to the Rambam. So the seder is only within the realm of avodas pnim itself. L'fi dvarav nira, shekein gam lehepach shavodas shebechutz ma'akvos avodas shebifnim habos achreya. Let me read that again. Shavodos shebechutz mi'akvos es avodos hapnim shelachreya. So again, what he's saying is that the avodas pnim are not ma'akvos avodas chutz, but avodas chutz are ma'akvos avodas pnim. I don't know why he uses the phrase nira gam kein lehepach. Again, in pedagogy, he could have been a lot clearer over here. Somebody should have edited this. Okay, now let's give some practical, hands-on examples of shinui seder. Kigon, hiktim v'nosan es matnos hapar ba'heichal, kodem shenosan matnos haseir b'kodesh hakadosh. Remember, there's two sets of matonos for these very two unique karbanos. One is the par chatos of the Kohen Gadol, and the other is the soyer chatos of the Am. In the case of the soyer chatos of the Am, the hazah, which must take place in the Kodesh Kodshim, comes before the avodas hadam of the paroshel Kohen Gadol, the matonos of the par, which are in the heichal. So he says in parentheses that Zman Nesinas Matnas Hapar Behechal Huli Achar Nesinas Dam Hasoyer B'Kodesh Kadosh. And now he messed up. Instead of waiting till the Dam Hasoyer would be sprinkled in the Kodesh Kadoshim, he already brought the Dam of the Paroshel Kohen Gadol in the Heichal. And he says the following: L'shita Rishona Eina Matonos Beheichal Psulos Shelefi Shematonos Heichal Nefshavas Kavodas Chutz. Right, we had a machlokas, again, I mentioned it now, but we discussed it in great length yesterday. What does chutz mean? And now we're going according to one sheet of the Rishonim that avodas chutz means chutz l'kodesh kadosh. So any avoda in the heichal is classified as avodas chutz. And now we're assuming that avodas chutz, remember we had such a shita, is a separate system, a separate entity. It has its own inner seder. But it's not related to the seder of the avodas pnim. So that according to this shita, only if he changes the order of avodas pnim or the order of avodas chutz, but the order of avodas pnim is not going to impact on the avodas chutz. So, if that be the case, the avodas pnim of the soil la'am, which requires the hazah in the Kodesh Kodashim, has no impact whatsoever on the avodah shebehechal of the partial Kohen Gadol, which is now called avodas chutz, because we're going according to those Rishonim that any avodah that's outside the Kodesh Kodashim is classified as avodas chutz, and we're going according to those Rishonim who say that avodas chutz has its own independent seder sequence, and it's not impacted by avodas pnim. Hare lo nemar bohen shavodas hakodmos lehem miyakvos. In other words, the avodas chutz, which in this case is in the heichal, has its own system. It's impervious to any impact of seder with regard to the avodas pnim. But l'shita shniya matanas heichal psulas hein mishum shematan schar dam hasor b'kodesh kadoshim mi'akev es avodas habos liachrov milaratzos lefonov v'nimtza shelo yuchshu matnas haheichal kodem matnas hasor shebifnim. So if we go according to those Rishonim that classify avodas shebeheichal as avodas pnim, and the pnim is not just limited to the Kodesh Kodashim, but includes all the heichal, so then the matan domim of the paro parchata shel kohen gadol is called an avodas pnim, and that avodas pnim has to come after the hazah of the sa'ir bifnim, meaning lefnai v'lefnim in the Kodesh Kodashim. If he hasn't implemented that hazah sadam in the Kodesh Kodashim, then the avodas hahechal of the paro shel kohen gadol is going to be invalid. V'chein lehepuch hiktim es avodas hotzas kaf umachta mikodesh kadoshim v'hotziam. He uses the plural hotziam because his kaf and machta. The kaf is the ladle and the machta is the shovel. Hotziam kodem lakrovas elo shel kohen gadol. Okay, we have now the aisle of the kohen gadol. Remember, until now we talked about the partial kohen gadol, but there is also an aisle liola that has to be brought by the kohen gadol, and that aisle of the ola is brought after the hotzas kaf umachta. And instead, just 1 second, what did I just say? Forget about what I just said. Let me just get the sequence again. The avodas olas aisle shel ola of the kohen gadol has to take place before, I think I said the opposite, before the hotzas kafu machta. And instead, he switched around the order. And he took out the kafu machta from the Kodesh Kodashim before the akrovas ha'ayil. Oh, let's read it again. Hikdim es havodas hotzas kaf umachta mikodesh hakadoshim motziam kodem lakrovas elo shel kohen gadol, the ola of the kohen gadol, the elo ha'am be'azara. Shezman hotzas kaf umachta reuli achar akrovas elo ve'el ha'am is l'shita shniya ein hotzas kaf umachta psula. Again, he was mocked in hotzas kafu machta, mishum sharak avodas shebifnim ma'akvos sabos liachreim v'elo v'el ha'am shein avodas chutz eno ma'akvos avodas shel achreim. Right, so we had a machlokus here whether or not we cross parties here, so to speak, between avodas pnim and avodas chutz, and according to those that avodas pnim and avodas chutz are interrelated and interdependent as far as sequence is concerned. So even though Hotzas Kafu Machtas Avodas Pnim, whereas the Ayel Shel Kohen Gadol and the Ayel Shalom is Avodas Chutz, nevertheless we still have a critical requirement of Seder, and it's the Avodah Bifnim of Hotzas Machtas is dependent on the Hakdama, what has to come before it, of the Avodas Chutz of the Ayel, is therefore Hotzas Kafu Machta is Psula. Again, you have to figure out what he does in such a case, but Ulashita Shni, however, that what that avodas chutz and avodas pnim are two separate systems, and they don't impact one or the other. Therefore, ein hotzas kafu machta psula. Why? Because an avodas pnim is impervious to any sort of shinui seder that comes from mibachutz. Mishum sharak avodas hapnim ma'akvos sabos lachreim. So within avodas pnim itself, there's a sequence, and if you didn't do A and you did B, that's going to be ma'akiv B. But the ilu, however, elo the el ha'am shem avodas chutz ein ma'akvis avodas shachreim yirletzos lefneim. There's no ikuv on avodas pnim. But l'shita rishona harei otzas kafu machta psula uficha krovas elo v'el ha'am hi avoda kiduma avodas hapnim shel otzas kafu machta mimakeves milaratzos lifnei. So if we view it as two overlapping and independent systems, then the hotzas kafu machta before the ayel and el ha'am is going to passel the hotzas kafu machta. Again, what that means lamaisa, I don't know. I guess there's still gecholim there, so you can go into the Kodesh Kodshim a second time around and do another repeat performance of hotzas kafu machta. Af hasover. Okay, we just want to finish this section so that next week in Shem we can talk about the avodos themselves. But finishing up on Seder, Afa Sover Shein Seder Ma'akiv Avodos Hanasos B'Bignei Lovan Mibachutz. So we had that shita that says that all the avodos that are done in Big Day Lovan, which normally is Bifnim, but there are avodos that he does Bachutz in the Big Day Chavan, and there's no din of Seder according to this Mandioma. Is lo Amar Ken Elu Bavodos She'enon Mitzorach Avodos Pnim Shachareya. Now, there's certain avodos which are done bachutz are litzorach avodas pnim. Again, we have to know what this means in an actual case, but just to get the theory of it, he says that ba'avodos she'eino mitzorach avodas pnim, if the avoda bachutz is not for the purpose of avodas pnim, then they're two separate entities, and the seder is not makir. But if avodas chutz hu mi sorech avodas pnim shalachreha, it somehow prepares the groundwork for the avodas pnim, then harei nechsheves kavodas pnim. But again, he's only saying this with regard to those avodas that require big day lovan. Lefichach, now he fleshes it out. Avodas hashchita bekarbonos pnimiyim ve'avodas hachafina harishona shel ktores af she'enon nasos bifnim mikomakom nechshavos kavodas pnim. All right, what comes next? In other words, he doesn't tell me. Let's assume that he needs another avoda the Ketores in the Kodesh Kodshim, and that avoda has to come after the shechita of the karbanos pnimiyim and after the chafina rishona. So we're going to have another chafina in the Kodesh Kodshim, and now we have avodos which have to come before them, that are avodas chutz, that are done on the mizbeach and the choshes and the azara. For example, he's got shchita of karbanos, or he has chafina rishona, which is done mibachutz. And in all those cases, since those avodos are preliminary avodos that set up and prepare for the avodas pnim, even though they are technically called avodas chutz, but they require big day lavan, therefore their kedima is absolutely critical. The truth is, I would have written this whole thing differently. I would have said we should have gone through the various avodas hayom before we talk about seder, because everything that we said is very, very abstract. Once you know the karbanos and the avoda, and you're familiar with the seder, then you can talk about all the different opinions and the debates which seder is ma'akev. So I would write a letter to the editor that he should have changed the sequence here. All right, let's learn Masechta Yoma now.